Tonight we're tackling the bad news. As we look around the world, I said it last week, things are not as they should be. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. You look around and things are messy, and then you look around your own life, and if you're honest, it's kind of like things aren't right in my life either. In myself, things aren't right. So there's a problem, and the Bible tackles it head on, and it gives an explanation for all of that. And it is the bad news. And I want to mention that now, so as to not leave you hanging. Well, we are going to leave you hanging, but I want you to know that next week is the good news. Okay? So while tonight might be a little bit heavy, there is good news in store, and it's way better than the doctor's good news. So I'm going to throw it over to Connor now, and we're going to get started.
Good evening. A few people have been knocked over. I've got a cold, so question time will be interesting. My brain's a bit furry, but other people have also got some sickness tonight as well. But I just wanted to cast our eyes back to what we had in the first week, where we saw Jesus come along and say, look, I'm going to offer you the good life. That's what we saw the first week. And then he came along and said, look, I'm going to offer you the good life because I'm the one you should worship, and I give the good life, and I claim to be God. And we just thought it's a huge claim to make. And we saw, what do you do with someone who makes that claim to offer the good life because he's the one you should worship, who is God? He's either got to be a lunatic, he's got to be a liar, he could be a legend, or maybe the Lord. And then we saw last week that he wasn't a legend, because we saw that the actual information we had about Jesus was actually true, and you want to make sure it is true because it's such significant information. And we saw that the information that was, as it was written down reliably, and as it's gotten from then to us reliably as well. And so today we're going to think about how our relationship with God as people has been broken. That's what we're really looking at. And what hinders and blocks our relationship with God. And I want to start off really by something we call the goodness ladder. And on this goodness ladder, what we're going to do is imagine that we have God who really, I imagine, made this ladder go about 2 kilometres in the sky. I wouldn't be able to do that. But so God is up the top of this goodness ladder. He's way up the top. That's how going higher is going, good English, gooder, better. And what I want to do is you tell me on the goodness ladder where you want to put people on the scale of goodness. Okay? So yell out. So, down here, is it further down? So here's somebody. Where do you want to put him? Below? Yeah, okay. He is now touching the floor. Okay, so now another person. So say he is, 50%, just for... Say that again?
I'm an Apple fan, so he's going to go...
Okay, Apple fan people are going to put it a little bit low. Anybody else want to have any... Do you know you give millions away for research?
Actually, you know what? If you didn't say the Gates Family Foundation, if that is the case, let's give him above that.
A little bit above, you compensate. Anybody else want to change it from here? Okay, other than got the Microsoft fans up the back too. Now, please be gentle with this one. So the Prime Minister of Australia, where would you put him?
Lower thigh.
Lower thigh. Okay, anybody else want to adjust? No? Okay, we're going to go there, okay. You're a very accommodating bunch. I haven't. The Pope. So, above or below Bill Gates? Above? Below. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so we've got different opinions there. So, okay, I'll put him there. Okay, I think it's that bad. So Miley Cyrus, where would you put her?
Below Malcolm.
Below Malcolm? Above Malcolm? It's going to interesting. Why, isn't it? How about, this table got any ideas? Where would you like to put Miley Cyrus, the singer? Do you guys got any opinions? Is that right? Okay. It starts showing up interesting thing, isn't it? How do you even make that call? Now the big question is, don't yell this out, and this is not talking about myself, but where would you put you? Now, don't obviously say anything there, but it's a good point to think, where would you put yourself? And then the question is, why? On what basis? Who's measuring? Who decides? And the way I think we often work, if this is a goodness ladder, you kind of work out how good you are by comparing yourself to other people. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the word sin, but often people think of sin as doing really bad stuff. It's kind of like the murdering, the raping, the stealing. And what we often do, we probably do this unconsciously, is we often go and think, well, I'm probably better than average. We feel like we're okay. We don't think we're like Hitler. I think I'm probably reasonably good. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm okay. I'm trying pretty hard, and therefore God will be happy with me. I reckon that's how often Australians will think about themselves in their goodness and their goodness relating to God. I want to raise some questions with even this way of thinking. These are rhetorical questions, but just think in your mind, how good does God expect? How good do we have to be okay with God? How good do we have to be in relationship with God? And how good do you have to be to get to heaven? Now, Jesus has a different view. That's often how we think about sin in our community. But Jesus has a different view of sin than just doing a few wrong things. And the amazing thing about Jesus is that he was a person who, on the one hand, was someone who says God is going to hold every single person accountable for what they do. Every single man and woman will be judged for what they've done, for every sinful thing they've done. And then on the other hand, he hung around with people who were called sinners. So much so that he got the nickname from the religious leaders at the time in the first century as someone who was a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And so he has these two things. He's hanging around with sinners, and yet he says every single person will be judged with sin. And one time Jesus actually stopped and asked to explain his view of sin. And so what he did is he told a story. And in this story, there is a father who's meant to be like God, and the son is meant to be like sinners. So I'm going to read out a bit. It's from in the New Testament, the second part of the Bible, in a book called Luke. We saw Dr. Luke last week. And this is what the story is. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Take me, or make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and a sandal on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. So the younger son is like the sinners, and God is like the Father. And as we said, our society often thinks that sin is big, immoral things, murder, theft, hurting someone really badly. And on that definition, if that's what sin was, then perhaps we think, well, actually, I'm not that bad. But Jesus' understanding of sin in this story is quite different. He sees a sinner as what the young son does. And the main thing that the young son does that's wrong is not necessarily his wild living, but that he demanded his father's share of the inheritance and then went off by himself. So he wants what his father has, but he doesn't want a relationship with the father. And on that definition of sinning, the Bible says that none of us can claim to be without sin. And that includes me. So we like the things that God gives us. We live in a beautiful place in the world. We like food, we like the life, we like friendship that God gives us, work, money, all the things that God gives to us. But Jesus says what we do is we kind of keep our distance from God. We may not do it consciously, or we may do it consciously. We may just neglect God. And we may talk to him even occasionally, and I did this. I remember before I started following Jesus, I would pray to God, especially when I was in trouble. I'm praying vividly before the HSC, please help me go well. But otherwise, I didn't live for him. Now, we can neglect God, not constantly thanking him for all the good things that we get, not seeking his advice in our life, not giving him the honour that he deserves, because he is God, not living for his priorities, rather than we decide to do what we want to do. Now, we may or may not be living wildly, but Jesus says what we do is we want to live independently from God. And as a result of kind of neglecting God, not living for God, we do wrong things. See, it's a bit like chickenpox. Chickenpox, the problem is you get a virus, and as a result of that you get spots all over yourself. Sin is like the virus that's inside of us, and that causes us to do and say and think wrong things. And that saying, doing and thinking wrong things are like the symptoms, are like the spots of us neglecting God and pushing God away. So sin is our neglect of God. The spots are the things that we do, say and think that show that we rebel against God. And the thing is, we all do it. We may be good sometimes. We may actually love people. We may be kind to people, especially people part of family or our mates. And we may look at the things that we do that are good and think, well, I'm not that bad. But we don't live for God. That's the heart of sin, not just doing bad things. And the things that we do in our life, the bad things that we do, the things that we think, the things that we say, the things that we do that are wrong, and they're not doing the good things, they're a reflection, they're an indication that we've actually neglected and ignored God. Now, sometimes just kind of a bit of a way to see what we're actually like. Say you did 3 things a day that were not right. Say you thought one wrong thing, say you said one wrong thing, and then you did one wrong thing. Now 3 7s are 21, so about 20 a week. Now it's about 50 weeks in the year, so 50 times 20 is about 1,000. So if you're 30, that's 30,000 things that you've done wrong. And that's only doing 3 a day. 50,000 things you've done wrong. This is me included. Okay, and that's conservative because sometimes you can go in 5 minutes, if you're impatient or the kids do something badly, or if you're getting frustrated on the road, you can do 3 things wrong in 3 minutes. And that kind of reflects, and then that's not even taking into account the good things that we should do, loving God with all that we have and loving other people more than ourselves. We may be okay when we compare ourselves to other people, when we kind of put ourselves subconsciously on a goodness ladder. But Jesus says humanity is not good. Jesus says we are sinful, we are sinners, all of us. We all fall short of God's perfect standard. Jesus says it, and we experience it. Now what's God going to do about that? Well, the thing about God is that justice and love collide. So two things. The first thing is justice. Justice and love collide, and the first thing is justice. We love justice, especially when someone's done something unjust to us. That's when we really love justice. We feel a real desire, and you can get really angry when injustice happens. If you ever watch TV, current affair or something, it seems like every fit stories like this, that you see someone, a guy, a con artist, rip off an elderly couple of all their superannuation. And you're watching that and you start going, you start feeling, that's not right. Or if you remember a while ago, but when the guys, the Bali bombers, set off bomb and killed 88 Australians. That's not right. Or a while longer ago, Martin Bryan, who shot up Port Arthur and killed 35 people. Or more recently with Haron Monis in Martin Place, where he killed people. Or people were killed as a result of his actions. And you see them and you think, we want justice. Imagine how you would feel if the Bali bombers went to the law courts and the judge says, well, you feel sorry for what you do, that's okay, you can go. There'd be injustice spread across the newspapers that day. It also says that the 88 Australians who were killed were insignificant. God says we've neglected him. He is the creator of the universe, the one who's given me life and you life. And we haven't treated him appropriately. And so he says, for justice to be there, he says we need to face judgment. His anger. And the Bible talks about that, and Jesus talks about that and calls it hell. Sin, God says, needs to be punished. And the biggest sin is neglecting God and not living for God all of our lives. And justice also says that we are important. And what we do is important. Now, we could just think of maybe a superficial fix. Say you go to your doctor and you've got your chicken pox and the doctor says, I know just a thing. He goes to one of his cabinets and he pulls out some band-aids and starts putting band-aids on your spots. You're thinking, that's not going to do a thing. That's just treating the symptoms. Some people say, well, I'll try and be good, as if that's going to be enough. But it won't work. Because a few good things, even if you said, from today onwards, I'm going to try the best I can for the rest of the future, that's not going to fix up your relationship with God as long as, even if you're as good as you can possibly be. It won't get rid of your past sin. It's not going to fix up your future sin. And that's the biggest thing. Even if I tried to be good from this day onwards, it's not going to fix up my heart that's rebellious against God. If God is perfect, as we saw with the ladder, and we are not, the gap is not just a little bit. Remember I said if the ladder was a couple of kilometres into the sky, that would get getting closer. God is perfection and good and loving, and I'm not. The gap between us and God is massive. Now, I can swim okay. Say you couldn't swim okay. If we both went up to Nora Head, to Soldiers Beach, and stood on the edge, it doesn't matter if you couldn't swim very well at all, if we're both meant to be swimming to England. Because it's just massive. It doesn't matter if you're a little bit better than me and I'm a little bit down here, if God is perfection and we're all dwelling around here. Or maybe you're really good at high jump and I'm useless at high jump. It doesn't make any difference if you're trying to stand together and jump to the moon. Neither of you get there. None of us, by trying to be a little bit better than other people, will ever be good enough for God. We can't get rid of our past sin, we won't get rid of our future sin, and it doesn't change our heart in rebellion against God. So it'll never fix our relationship. Can I say this and kind of underline it? Have arrows pointing at it. Put in a flashing italic. Because this is the thing I think most people get wrong. I've even had people, I've done exactly this, and at the end of life I've chatted to people, and they still haven't heard. So I can kind of make this really loud. No one will get to heaven by being good. You can't get to heaven by being good. You can't try and be better to get to heaven. It will never work. That's what the Bible says. Good people won't get to heaven. And so Jesus says the way you're going to get to heaven is not by trying to be a good person. Not by trying to be good. Because what happens, people say, well, do you think you'll go to heaven? And someone says, I hope so. And I say, oh, how do you think you'll go to heaven? Oh, well, I try and be a good person. that won't work because we have this heart that rebels against God. Being good won't get us to heaven, what Jesus says. Justice needs to happen. We need to be punished for my sin and your sin. And God will rightly and justly punish us. So that's justice. And then the other thing is, God is so loving. So loving. He's just, but he's also loving. In the story that Jesus told, we have God, who is like the Father, and the Son, who's like us, or sinners. And did you see how the Father reacted to his Son? The Father sees his Son coming, and it says from a long way off, because he's watching and he's waiting because he loves his son so much. He wants him to come back. And the Father, when he sees his Son, what does he do? He runs. And for a first century father, you did not run. It's kind of a bit like a high court judge in their wig and all their gowns running down the centre of Sydney. You just don't do that type of thing. But because of his love for his Son so much, which is God's love for sinners so much, he runs. He embraces his Son, he kisses his Son, and no sooner has apology come, what does he do? He gives gifts to his Son. He lavishes gifts on him. Put a ring on his finger, put a coat on his shoulders, sandal on his feet, and says, let's have a celebration. We may have lots of different pictures of God. You may have pictures of God, what you think he's like by your parents or a grandparent. Maybe it's from teachers and school. It could be from watching The Simpsons or stained glass windows. And we build up all these pictures. But Jesus gives us a true picture of who God is like, as we saw 2 weeks ago. He is the true picture of God and what he's like. And Jesus says, God is a searching, running, embracing, lavishing, pardoning, partying parent. That's the true picture of God. So God is just. He's got to be just because he's holy and perfect. He's just and gives justice. And yet God is also love. And he loves those who deserve punishment, sinners, us, each one of us, every single one of us. And that's why Jesus befriended sinners. So the question then is, how can God welcome us back when justice needs to happen and he's also loving? And that's where justice and love will collide. And we'll see that next week.
We're going to leave you hanging there. But you might have questions. It's a good spot to leave us hanging because that raises a whole bunch of things that may be going through your head. It might be brand new stuff. It might be stuff you thought about before and you've still got some questions. So as usual, we're going to have a break now, tea, coffee, cake, and I'll come around and see if you've got any, if you want to write any down on a piece of paper, and we'll finish up a bit later on by seeing how we go, answering some questions.